With food insecurity rising the world over, we cannot escape the reality that climate change is changing our food supply. This means people's livelihoods and lifestyles are changing too, particularly in developing countries. In today's podcast, we'll talk with experts in Central America and specifically Honduras to better understand how climate change is impacting community resilience and food security, and how shifts in international support could make a big difference. Welcome to the Leading Voices in Food podcast series. I'm Norbert Wilson, professor of public policy at Duke University and director of the World Food Policy Center. It is my great pleasure to also welcome my colleague and co-host, Sarah Bermeo, Duke University Sanford School of Public Policy political economist, who also directs the Duke program on climate, resilience, and mobility. Sarah?
Thanks, Norbert. It's great to be here with you and to have a chance to interview our two guests who will also be taking part in the Duke Climate Collaboration Symposium later this week, titled Climate Resilience and Mobility, and who both bring expertise in food security and development in Central America. Marie-Soleil Turmel is a scientific advisor for Catholic Relief Services' Water Smart Agriculture platform in Latin America and the Caribbean region. She is an agronomist and soil scientist with 15 years of experience conducting research and extension to promote soil health, productivity, and climate resilience of smallholder farming systems in Latin America. I first encountered Marie after reading a study she had led on the impacts of Catholic Relief Services' water smart agriculture programs in the dry corridor of Central America. She and her team showed that there have been positive effects of adopting these practices even during the severe 2018 drought. We have since begun collaborating on new work to continue studying the impacts of agricultural programs conducted by Catholic Relief Services in the region. Ana Andino is a doctoral student here at Duke Sanford School of Public Policy. She holds a Master of Science from the London School of Economics. Her research explores the nexus of political economy, climate migration, food insecurity, and international development. Prior to joining Duke, Ana worked on development issues in Honduras, her home country, through the Ministry of Finance. She is now an integral part of the Duke team collaborating with Catholic Relief Services. Marie and Ana, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah and Norbert, for having us on the show.
Well, I'd like to launch right in. And Marie, starting with you, some of your work with Catholic Relief Services engages with smallholder farmers in an area known as the Dry Corridor of Central America. Can you explain what the Dry Corridor is and provide some context about the food security situation in that area? And how much do residents depend on their own crops to provide food for their families?
So the Dry Corridor of Central America refers to a region that stretches across the Pacific side of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. The region has a long dry season and a rainy season when the crops are produced. In the last 10 years, this region has been characterized as one of the most vulnerable to climate change, mainly due to prolonged dry spells in the growing season and more unpredictable rainfall patterns. So this region is made up of many smallholder farmers in the rural population. These are small hillside farms growing staple crops, maize or corn, and beans with relatively low yields. And most of the household consumption is coming from these farms, and they're selling any surplus that is produced in a good year. So these are rain-fed production systems. So the amount of food that the farms produced is directly tied to the amount of rainfall, making them extremely vulnerable to droughts and climate shocks. And also the region has a very high degree of soil degradation. It's estimated 70% of agricultural soils are in a state of severe degradation. So this makes farms even more susceptible to climate shocks. So this is a region that's already struggling with poverty, close to 8 million people living in a situation of food insecurity. And now with increasing climate shocks that are affecting crop yields, it's sending more people into a situation of food emergency and requiring food aid.
Thank you, Marie, for providing that context. Norbert?
Ana, let's now turn to you. I understand that you've worked with the Honduran Ministry of Finance and the Inter-American Development Bank on issues relating to economic development in Honduras. What do you view as some of the key development challenges facing the country?
Thank you, Norbert, for your question. So Honduras faces several challenges which have been dragged down for many years, and now some of them have even worsened particularly since 2020 when we were hit by the pandemic and the storms at Iota. So it's tough to pinpoint just one or a few of them, since it's a convergence of complex scenarios. But if I had to mention one, and going along with the conversation we're having today, I would mention the intersection between climate change and economic vulnerability. So as we heard Marie talking about the dry corridor, there are many rural communities that rely heavily on agriculture, but climate variability has made it even more difficult to maintain stable food production, affecting income and food insecurity. So by mid 2023, about 25% of the population was suffering from food insecurity. Nationwide agriculture provides employment for approximately 30% of the country's workforce, and there's diversification in agriculture is also limited, which this dependency constrains sustainable growth and resilience. Also, I cannot leave behind the access to basic services such as water and electricity. Of course, I'll include this education, right? It is important, and it's only not a matter of access to them, but also the quality of the services. Many households lack access to clean water. This impacts their daily life, but also their agricultural productivity. And even in the main cities, there is an inconsistent access to water and electricity, which affects livelihoods, but also small businesses to larger industries. Education is a no-brainer since both access and quality remain a serious challenge. In this list, I would also like to add crime and violence, which remain high. And even though there has been an improvement in the last years, particularly reducing homicide rates, it still remains as one of the highest in Latin America. The situation is even worse when we look at femicide, because Honduras is still one of the highest, or has one of the highest rates of femicide in the region that often go along with high levels of impunity. And finally, or almost getting there to my list of challenges, I would say that there's a lack of infrastructure, particularly in rural areas. There's no reliable access to roads or markets, which this affects a lot smallholder farmers. This also affects connectivity for roads. It limits access to healthcare and education. And these all are challenges that compound together. And yeah, to finally wrap it up, it's that without institutions that can effectively implement policies and manage resources, it'll be hard to have development efforts and to see growth in the country.
This sounds like a daunting set of challenges. And I realize that, obviously in this conversation and the work that's going to happen later this week, we're not able to address all of those. But I would like to pull back and ask you both about issues around climate. And so for the both of you, I'd be intrigued to understand Central America is believed to be highly susceptible to climate change. And Marie, you've already mentioned this. What are some of the key effects that climate change is having on the region? And I've heard you already talk about issues around availability of water, but how do these affect the livelihoods, and particularly how does this affect food security? So Anna, let's begin with you.
Yeah, so as Marie mentioned, there are a lot of extreme weather events going around. As she mentioned, prolonged droughts, intense rainfall, tropical storms. And these weather patterns have a direct and severe impact on agricultural productivity, especially in regions where families rely a lot on subsistence farming. It becomes a challenge to plant, to harvest crops. This leads to a reduction in yields. Also, people have less income, referring to income losses, which in the end has a cascading effect on food insecurity and poverty. So basically, what happens, families have less to sell, but also have less to eat. If we transition to urban areas, climate change should cause floodings and damages to infrastructure, affecting severely industrial activity as well. This will disrupt the livelihoods of the people in the urban and rural areas. It exacerbates difficulties in accessing food, in accessing clean water, in accessing electricity. And just to give you an example, this happened back in 2020, right, with ETA and IOTA. We had long lasting effects, causing damages to agriculture, to livestock, to infrastructure. The effect on GDP was approximately 8 to 9% of GDP. And surprisingly, poverty rose 14 percentage points, which is a big. If you see national surveys going around, they have shown that people are having issues in getting access to food, and many people have also had to change their diet, leaving behind some proteins and introducing more carbohydrates or foods that are less expensive than proteins, right?
Oh, this is really important. Thank you for sharing that. Marie, what are some of
Yeah,
the things
so
that you're
Anna
observing?
really summed it up well, but I would add that it's really important to understand that these farmers don't have crop insurance to fall back on like farmers in the US. So we're seeing more frequent climate shocks, sometimes years in a row, droughts, hurricanes, and farmers might be able to borrow seed or money or inputs to buy inputs to replant the next year. But after consecutive bad harvests, they run out of options and resources and really can't recover. And also keeping in mind that about 60% of the food in the region is coming from smallholder farms. And these climate shocks resulting in yield damage have implications for food prices and food security at the regional level, not just at the farm level, right?
So Anna and Marie, you do a very nice job laying out the multiple challenges that are facing in urban areas. Turning from that to thinking about adaptations or policy changes that could be successful, can you think of some that might help in decreasing the negative impacts of climate change on farmers, particularly in the dry corridor? And have you seen evidence? Can you bring evidence from your previous work for this to think about pathways forward and whether or not those would be scalable to additional farmers?
So a focus on land restoration and soil restoration is really key to building climate resilience. As I mentioned, these are areas with really highly degraded soils that are even more susceptible to these climate shocks. So we're talking about managing the soils to manage water. And so I just want to take a moment to explain why soils are so important for climate resilience. A healthy soil will capture and infiltrate more rainwater. These are rain-fed systems depending on every drop that falls. They store more water for plant production and also percolate more water down to recharge groundwater, which has an implication for water availability in the whole area. In a degraded soil, like much of the agricultural land in the dry corridor and other parts of the world, soils have lost this function and the rainwater runs off, it's not captured, it's not stored, and the crops grown in that soil are much more susceptible to periods without rain, and there's overall less water availability. So when soil and water resources are degraded, agricultural productivity is low, the families are susceptible to climate shocks, and this keeps them in a cycle of emergency and recovery and poverty. The good news is that the ability of soils to capture and store rainwater can be restored with good agricultural practices that build soil organic matter, protect the soils from erosion. In CRS and in our programs, we call this water smart agriculture practices. And in one of our programs from 2016 to 2020, we monitored a network of farms where we tested these practices with farmers on their farms in side-by-side plots, comparing the water smart agriculture practices with conventional practices. Within that period, a very severe drought in 2018 hit. It affected the whole region. And we found that these soils could store up to 26% more moisture during this drought period. And on average, yields were 39% higher. So in a drought year, this can make the difference between a family producing enough food to still meet their household needs or being in an emergency situation and having to rely on food aid. And also we found it in good years, yields were also much higher because of these good management practices, meaning that farmers could produce and sell more surplus, improve their income, savings, and this also contributes to greater overall resilience. And just to note also that these practices also sequester more carbon in agricultural systems, which also has climate mitigation impacts. Now, this alone, soil management alone, is not going to bring farmers out of poverty. We need to build on this foundation of good natural resource management with market access, diversification, with more lucrative crops, access to financing, and of course, increasing opportunities for women and youth. But all of this needs to be built on this foundation of restoring soil and water resources so that we can be successful with these other types of development interventions. So we're working to scale these practices in the dry corridor by working with a network of partners, including other local NGOs, government agencies. And one of the main limitations is that farmers have is gaining access to any type of agricultural extension services. So we're really working to strengthen local extension. We're using a hybrid model that combines field training with digital extension tools and radio for mass communication to reach more people. And we know from some of our work and some of the work I'm doing with Sarah and Anna to look at the adoption of these practices that when farmers do have access to extension services and training, they are in fact applying and adopting the practices.
Thank you, Marie, for providing the detail about some of the programs that you're seeing and the evidence that these are evidence-based practices that are actually making a difference for the farmers that you are working with. I want to turn to Anna now and shift the conversation just a little bit. Marie was laying out some really potential ways to turn things around and ways that life could become better for farmers. But what do you see as some of the consequences of inaction if we don't keep on with these programs and if programs are not scaled up to help smallholder farmers and others in the region? What do you think will be the consequences of that for poverty and food security in Central America?
So yeah, Sarah, that's a great question. Again, it's hard to give an exact answer on what would be the exact result of this. But there was this one thing that popped into my mind immediately, which is an accelerated flow of people migrating both within the region and towards the US as well. Because people are seeking to escape these harsh living conditions, right? So food insecurity would get worse, particularly in susceptible areas like the dry corridor, where farmers are already struggling with this climate unpredictability. Rural families will also face greater challenges in meeting their basic nutritional needs, potentially leading to malnutrition and health crises. And even in urban areas, high prices and food shortage will disproportionately impact the most vulnerable communities, exacerbating inequality. Now, additionally to that, failing to act now will result in a greater cost in the future. And I believe another concerning consequence of inaction is the displacement of young people. And here I must add that right now Honduras has a demographic dividend, and we're not taking advantage of it. So many young individuals migrate in search of better opportunities, leading to the so called brain drain, or even they leave the country without any further motivation to help the country while they're being abroad. So, with insufficient opportunities for education, for employment, we are risking youth to becoming trapped in cycles of poverty. We're losing people that are capable of helping the country, and this will undermine long-term community development and stability.
Anna, thanks so much for providing that context for the need for action and what the consequences of inaction might be.
This has been a challenging conversation. We've talked about a number of things that are going wrong or where some of the challenges are. I actually want to turn the conversation to see where are some ways forward. And so what are some of the positive changes that can take place? And, Catholic Relief Services is doing some really important work. And I want to hear more about that. But I also want to hear about it in the context of what could happen if policymakers, government officials, or decision makers in the international development institutions, if they changed policy or they created new opportunities. So what would you say are still some really pressing needs? And where would you focus money and efforts to get the biggest impact or help for the most people? Marie, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I just want to emphasize again just the importance of investing in land and soil restoration as a foundation, as a strategy to build climate resilience. Now, we really need programs that are also creating economic opportunities and developing markets for farmers. But this needs to be linked with land restoration initiatives in order to ensure resilience and the sustainability of these activities. When land and soil are restored, these practices aren't just implemented, and they're not just implemented at the farm level, but like over whole landscapes. This improves productivity, but also water availability for households, urban areas, and other activities. So even programs that promote irrigation technologies as a solution for the dry corridor, which is really like a way forward also, these need to be linked with the land restoration activities because this water needs to come from somewhere. So we need to ensure that we're protecting our water resources and ensuring the availability for these other activities, or else we won't be successful and they also won't be sustainable. We also really need to invest more in capacity building aspects of our development programming, not just focusing on asset replacement, which is necessary, but we need a good balance of investing in capacity building. This means farmers, agronomists, agricultural institutes to strengthen the extension systems and improving access to information around soil and climate for improved decision making and management of these resources, and in order to also take action to reduce overall risk and climate risk in the area. So really building the capacity and the management practices that can, in the long term, reduce dependencies on external aid.
Anna, what about you?
I think Mary summed up everything very well. I'm impressed because I was thinking on the same exact thing. But if I had to rephrase what she said in my own words, I would focus a lot on infrastructure development, both physical and digital. This is essential. Invest in better roads, market access, but also digital connectivity would enable the population, farmers, entrepreneurs to reach bigger markets, fostering economic growth and development. And in here, I also include improvements to infrastructure to be climate resilient and friendly to the environment. And going along to what she said about capacity development, I would also give focus on improving productive skills. Many companies in the region, and especially in Honduras, highlight the limited ability of the workforce to generate high value opportunities as a major constraint. So, concrete advances in competitiveness and innovation are needed in this sense. And I would wrap this wish list saying that for any policy to be considered, if you want to talk to them, to any government official or international organization, there has to be more focus and importance on inclusive policies. They have to engage local communities, they have to engage women, they have to engage youth in decision-making processes. And basically, we want to ensure that these groups have voice in policy development.
Great, thanks, Anna. I want to, turn this attention now to thinking about research. So Duke is an institution where research is one of our primary functions. And thinking broadly about the impacts of climate change on agriculture and food security, where do you see the biggest need for additional research? And maybe to think about it another way, which research questions, if they were answered, could be transformative? And how might academic researchers partner with organizations like Catholic Relief Services and others doing work in the field in order to answer some of these questions about practical applications that could help on the ground? And Anna, let's begin with you.
Thank you for your question, Sarah. I would say our work with CRS has given us a lot of ideas on how we can improve in this sense. For instance, we need to understand how different technologies and practices performed in diverse kinds of conditions are crucial. What factors influence a farmer's adoption of one technology more than another, considering the heterogeneity of each farmer and each living condition. But I would also be interested in exploring how climate change impacts household dynamics and whether, if there's a shift in roles, men and women, right? If there's an increase in women empowerment within the agricultural context once they're exposed to these new technologies, how they make the decision on what to eat, how much to eat, what to produce, what not to produce. And I would say also, and this is my Santa wish list of the things I want to research about as well, is understanding their desire to migrate even under these improved conditions. Like even though we're giving them these technologies, like what is actually keeping these farmers that we are helping stay and keep doing or producing what they're doing and involving improving with time.
Marie, what about you?
Yeah, so from the development organization perspective, collaborations with academic institutes can really provide an opportunity for us to go beyond the scope of the kind of monitoring and learning that we build into our development projects and bring in different levels of expertise and research methods. So definitely something that can be beneficial for our programming. I see two main areas that require more research and where, collaborating with academic organizations or institutes could be a benefit. So the first is really around the whole biophysical type research on agricultural systems, practices to accelerate land restoration, drought tolerant crops and varieties to improve resilience to climate and market shocks, and also calibrating and applying different tools for decision making around soils and water resources. And then the other area is really research in development. So what's the effectiveness of our different delivery methods, of our programs, our extension models, and strategies for reaching and including women and youth, understanding the scaling strategy and how we can reach more farmers, and also translating these results and program impacts into policy recommendations. So really research that informs our development strategy to ensure that programs are really leading to transformative, sustainable change and improvements in livelihoods and food security and resilience.
I really do appreciate hearing this. As a researcher, it's so easy to get sort of, how do I get the next paper in a journal? But what you're talking about are research questions that really move the development efforts forward, that are sort of informed by what's happening on the ground, to make sure that the work that you all are doing is the work that leads to the best outcomes for the largest number of people. So I think this is a really good place for us to stop and see what the future of collaboration could look like, both with Duke and other institutions. So we would like to thank our guests today, Marie-Soleil Turmel from Catholic Relief Services and Ana Andino from Duke University Sanford School of Public Policy. I'd also like to thank Deborah Hill, who is the producer of this podcast. And of course, thank you to Sarah Bermeo, who has been an amazing co-host today. This podcast is co-sponsored by the Duke Program on Climate, Resilience, and Mobility. And thank you, the listeners. If you would like to subscribe to the Leading Voices in Food podcast, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or your favorite podcast apps. Transcripts are available at the website of the Duke World Food Policy Center. This is Norbert Wilson with Sarah Bermeo. Thank you.